After today's video, you're going to be able to fire your water cannon at the fire. It's going to reduce all particle systems in intensity. The fire will be able to go out, or if you decide to stop hitting it, or if you run out of water or whatever, that fire is going to be able to regenerate itself. Alright, welcome back to this Unity tutorial on how to put out a fire. Today we're going to do the scripting. Last time we left off on how we did the particle systems for all of this stuff. We put in smoke for these fires, and then I think that was pretty much it. So what we want to do now is go ahead and grab the prefab that we had made of the water hose, and we're going to go ahead and put that onto the camera, okay, and then we're going to zero this out, and we're going to make sure that that actually works. So let's zoom in on the camera. We want to make sure that that's going down the forward position of the camera, that it's not doing that. So what I'm going to do is use the E button to guide that fire hose to shoot in the forward direction of the camera, and I can go into my camera and check that that's actually working. I'm going to use the Y component of the rotation to make sure that it's shooting just pretty much straight down the pipe. And then I'm going to lower it a little bit so that it's under the camera. Right there is perfect. Okay, so copy these values and you can put that into your water hose, or you can, set it up so it's to your liking. Now, I'm using my scene light camera script, and that will give you kind of these same controls that you have in the scene mode and game mode. So when I press play, I can move around in the scene just like I would in scene mode. All right. Now, that water is going to follow me because it is a child of the camera. Perfect. What I need to do, I'm going to create two scripts. All right, I'm going to go into my scripts folder. I'm going to create a folder called firefighting, and I've already got these scripts here, but these are new scripts, fire and extinguisher. So create a script called fire and a script called extinguisher. I've already emptied these scripts for you. You can see here in the inspector that I've emptied these scripts. They're just basic mono behaviors without even the update or start methods. On the main camera, what I want to do is put the extinguisher script. So if you right click, create C# script, and then create extinguisher, you can go onto your main camera, add component, and then type in extinguisher, and that'll give you the ability to add that to your camera. Alright, so you need that on your camera, and then on your fire, let's go into scene mode and go over to our fire here. We're going to add the fire component to our fire. Alright, okay. Before we go too far, let's go ahead and think about what we need to do with the fire and the extinguisher. Obviously the fire, I'm going to pull up my script here. So with the fire, we want to burn while there's fuel, and instead of using fuel, we're just going to say that fuel is intensity. So we're going to create a float value on our fire called current intensity. Okay, and while that intensity is greater than 0, the fire is going to be burning. Okay, later, if we, for example, if we start to put out the fire and then we stop putting out the fire, right, if we run out of water or something, the fire would regenerate. Okay, so if the fire is partially extinguished, then we want to regenerate. We want to increase our current intensity to a maximum value again. Okay, and whenever whenever the fire is being extinguished or being regenerated, we want to change the amount of particles being emitted to be a function of the amount of intensity there is. Okay, so we'll think about how we can do that. Let's just go ahead and go into our fire and just start off with the current intensity. So I'm going to create a serialized field. It's going to be a private float called current intensity, and the maximum intensity is going to be 1. And because I know that the max is going to be a value between 0 and 1, I'm going to go ahead and use the range attribute and state that the range is going to be between 0 and 1. So if I put in a number that's greater than 1, or if I put in a number that's lower than 0, it's going to automatically put it to 0 or 1. Okay, so let's go back into our scene after having saved that and take a look at our fire component. And now we see current intensity, and because of that range attribute, it's going to give us a slider. If I try to automatically if I try to manually update that with a greater number than 1, then it will automatically put me to 1, and obviously if I do it with a number that's lower than 0, it's going to put me back at 0. Perfect. Okay. Now, we want to adjust the fire particle system based on our current intensity of the fire. So what I'm going to change is the emission rate over time. Okay, so our current intensity starts at 1, and what I want to do is as the slider goes down, I want our rate over time to go down as well. Now, what I can do is go into the script, and I can get a reference to my particle system. I call that the fire PS, and then I'm going to create a private function called change intensity. I'm going to pass in a float intensity. Actually, I can just use the current intensity. Let's see if that would work properly. Now, I'm going to say we need to get a variable emission, and that is going to be equal to the fire particle system's emission module. Okay, so that emission on the fire particle system is called the emission module. It's a struct, and we need to get a reference to that as opposed to creating one. Okay, to change that, you have to get a reference to it. All right, that's all you need to know right now. Actually, what we need to do is get the rate over time. So this is another struct. This is a min-max curve. You don't have to know too much about this, but it's if you don't do it like this, then Unity's going to throw you some errors. Okay, so we get a reference to that, and then as the intensity changes, what we're going to do is say emission.constant. Okay, we're going to change that to be equal to our current intensity times our start intensity. So that start intensity was 5. I don't want to have a magic number, so what I'm going to do is put a private float called start intensity. This is still a magic number because I've manually put in that 5, but now if I change that in the inspector or by bringing in the start method and saying fire PS emission module rate over time constant, what's that value? It's 5, right? Start intensity is equal to whatever we put in the inspector in that emission module in that rate over time constant. Okay, so let's take a look at what I just did. Okay, that start intensity, let's take a look at that. You can see that this is our emission module. Oops. This is our min-max. This is a min-max struct, okay, and this is a constant. We only see the one number here because we're using the constant. We could use a curve, we could use a random between two constants, or a random between two curves, but we're just using constant, okay. So on start, that start intensity is going to be set to whatever this number is, okay. And then when we go to change the intensity, that 5, that whatever that rate over time is going to be changed by whatever our current intensity is. So current intensity is really just a percentage of the maximum intensity, okay? And now we need to be able to change the intensity, and we should be able to do that in the update method. So this is just constantly changing the intensity as a function of the current intensity, and that changes the emission rate. This is not how we're going to do this in the final product, but this is good for testing. So let's go ahead and press save, and we will save the scene. We'll go back to our fire, grab that, and we need to put this particle system into the fire PS field. Let's press play. And then we're going to test to see if this rate over time changes as we move this slider. It does not. So let's think about why that might be. Okay, sorry. So I had looked at that wrong, and I had typed it out for you guys wrong. I'm looking right here at the Unity documentation for particle system emission modules. I copied this directly now, and this is going to work for you. So we're going to get a reference to the emission module, and then we're going to reference the rate over time and change that by, let's say, current intensity We don't even need to put this in here. We need to say our rate over time is determined by the current intensity times our start intensity. So let's go back into the inspector, into the editor, and look at that. So as we change our intensity, our rate over time goes down and up, depending on whatever that is. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now you can see that well, let's go back into play mode, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put my intensity down to 0. Okay, you can see that this fire is going to diminish, but we have these other systems. We have the embers, and then we have these flames, and then the smoke. And we want all of these emission rates to go down to 0. Okay, and you'll see that that will make the fire disappear. So let's take a look at how to do that quickly. We'll go back into our fire. And instead of having just one particle system, we're going to create an array of particle systems. So we'll say fire particle systems, rename that, and we're going to create a new array of particle systems, and we'll start that off at 0. And what we also have to do is create an array of floats for the start intensities of all of these. So I'm going to go ahead and call this start intensities. It's a new array, and it's of size 0. And what I want to say is I need to initialize that array. So let's start intensities equals new float array size of particle systems.length. And for each particle system that we have, we're going to initialize the start intensity. So start intensities at index I is fire particle systems at index I, emission rate over time constant. Okay, so it's pretty much the same thing as we did before, but now we're looping over an array. So we have to do that same thing down here for each particle system, and I use the for loop instead of the for each loop because it's faster than for each. But you can do either thing. All right, this is better for me because it's faster. Okay, so make sure that you're getting the intensities, the fire particle systems at index I. Okay, this is the emission module at index I of those fire particle systems, and then we're going to multiply the start intensities at index I by the current intensity. Okay, let's go back into the inspector, the editor, and make sure that we put all of our particle systems on here. I'm going to press this lock key so that this lock icon so that I can click on other things and still be looking at this wildfire component or this wildfire game object. Alright, so I'm going to grab all of these particle systems, and I'm going to just drop them into the fire particle systems field there. And let's go back to our fire. So now we have the particle systems on all of these, and if I press play and I decrease the intensity or increase the intensity, right? So let's take a look. If I decrease it, we'll see that the rate has decreased for everything. If I decrease it to 0, all of them will disappear. And then we could regenerate the fire there. Perfect. Okay, that's looking pretty decent. Now it's time for us to do this through an extinguisher. All right, it's cool if we can do it in the inspector, but obviously it's a lot cooler if we can aim our camera at the fire with water, and then the fires diminish. Okay, the way that we're going to do that, we have this extinguisher on our camera. If you don't have it on your camera, then click Add Component and add that extinguisher script that you had created. We'll go ahead and enter the script so we can edit it. I'm going to pull up my script and I'm going to show you what we should be doing. Okay, so we need to raycast and check if we're hitting a fire. And then if we're hitting a fire, we want to show a particle system to indicate to the player that they're hitting a fire. Okay, so steam maybe should come out. Once we extinguish the fire, that steam would stop, and then that's pretty much it. So if we're hitting a fire, we're going to try and extinguish it. Okay, so let's create an update method, and then we're going to go ahead and bring in the physics.raycast, and this is a boolean, right? So if I hover over here, I can see that this is a boolean. So what I want to do is create this as a conditional, and what I'm going to do is fire from the camera. So let's do a camera.main.transform.position. So I'm firing it from the camera's position. I'm going to fire it to the forward vector of the camera, the forward direction of the camera. And I'm going to fire that out to 100 meters, okay? But I need to get some information. So what I need to do is pass in a raycast hit, and if it hits something, it's going to return that hit struck to me, and I'll get some information from that, all right? So if we hit something, I'm just going to print whatever we hit. All right, so this will not work for our fire because we don't have a collider on our fire. So let's go ahead and put a collider on here. I'm going to use a sphere collider. Alright, you can see it's a pretty big sphere, radius of 4. That's cool. Okay, my smoke collides with stuff, so that's why the smoke went all the way out here. Alright, I could change this to a trigger, and the smoke would stop colliding with it. Okay, and this actually, I think right now, I'm not sure about you guys, but my settings make it so that raycasts do hit triggers. So you can see here that in the console, I am hitting the wildfire. Now I'm hitting the terrain. Now I'm hitting the wildfire. Okay, so that's working. All right. Now what I want to do is be able to extinguish the fire. So what actually I need to do is plan things a little bit. Let's make a little bit of a plan. This is my plan. I have two classes. I have the extinguisher and I have the fire. And what I want to do is be able to tell the fire how much of it to put out per second. So this would be, say for example, the volume of water that I put out per second, or if I'm using like this type of fire extinguisher, the volume of foam and the strength of the foam, how much of that fire is put out per second by that liquid or whatever. So in update right now, I'm checking to see if I'm hitting a fire, right, through that raycast. And if I'm watering that fire, I want to extinguish the fire. Okay, so I've got these private methods. That's why you see these minus signs. That means that these are private to extinguisher. Okay, so as I extinguish that fire, I'm checking to see if that fire is extinguished, and if it gets extinguished, I'm going to call this onExtinguish method so that I can turn off the steam or turn off, say for example, the water sound or the steam sound or something like that. Okay. Now the fire method, the fire class needs to have a public method called try_extinguish, and you can see with the plus sign that this is a public method, and it's going to return a boolean. Okay. What we want to do is say that if the fire still has intensity, still has fuel, then it's going to return false. It's not out. It's not extinguished. And if there's 0 intensity, then it's going to return true. Okay, so that means true, we have extinguished the fire, and that will then help us to call the onExtinguish and the extinguisher. Now this error here means that the extinguisher knows about the fire, but the fire doesn't care about the extinguisher. Okay, it's good to keep our classes separate like this. So let's go ahead and go back into Unity and create this try_extinguish method. So we're going to go into our fire here, and we are going to, let me put this into your screen here. We're going into the fire. We're going to create a new public bool. This is going to be a method called try_extinguish. And we're going to pass in a float. So that float is the amount that we're going to extinguish this fire per second. And all we have to do is say current intensity minus equals amount. And then we're going to call change intensity, and here we can stop calling it change intensity and update. So what we're going to do is, if it is what we're returning, right, this is a bool, so we're going to return whether or not the current intensity is greater than is less than or equal to 0, because if it's less than or equal to 0, the fire is out. And that means that extinguish has succeeded. That's true. Perfect. Let's save and go back into Unity. There's no way to call this right now, so let's actually go back into our extinguisher and say that if what we're hitting, okay, so I'm going to go back into my raycast call and I'm going to put in the logical and I'm going to say if hit dot collider, excuse me, let's just use hit dot, so remember we're passing this raycast hit and it gives us a bunch of different objects within it. So we're going to check the collider and say try get component out fire, right? So if we hit something and that something has a collider and that collider has a fire component, what we're going to do is fire.try extinguish, fire.try extinguish, and we're going to say that it extinguishes 0.1 per second. If we want to say 0.1 per second, then we have to use time.delta time. Okay. And actually, while we're in here, let's just go ahead and add a private float and say the amount extinguished per second. And we'll actually set that to 1 and see how that goes. So let's grab that and put that into our call on try extinguish. Save it. Let's go back into the scene and see what happens. This should work, but let's just make sure. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my fire to see what happens with the current intensity. All right, that's finished compiling. All right, so I'm looking at the current intensity here. I'm going to press play. I'm going to aim my cannon at the fire, and as you can see, the fire very, very quickly goes out. So I'm going to stop, and I'm going to change the amount of fire that gets extinguished per second. And I'm going to go ahead and put that at 0.1. Go back to my fire. Let me make sure I click on it so I can see the intensity. And you can see that it goes out a lot less quickly, and it's a little bit more fun to watch it diminish slowly. So that's working perfectly. So now what I want to do is make this fire regenerate if it's not being watered. Okay, so let's say that if it's at less than its maximum intensity and it still has fuel, right? Then we want to go ahead and increase the intensity again. Okay, so we're going to have a little delay. So to have a delay, we're going to have a float, which is the time last watered. And that's just going to start off at 0, and every time that we try to extinguish this fire, we're going to say that the time last watered equals time. So if I watered it at 11 o'clock today, then I'm going to say that the time last watered was 11 o'clock today. Okay. And now in update, I'm going to say that if, let's go ahead and delete this, if the time now, so let's say that it's 12 o'clock now, minus the time last watered is greater than or equal to, and now we need another float, which is going to be the regen time. So let's actually call this the regen delay. Let's say that if we stop watering a fire and after 2.5 seconds, and let's actually make this a serialized float so that we can change this. We're going to say that if after 2.5 seconds this hasn't been watered, okay, then we're going to go ahead and increase the intensity. So current intensity equals plus equals, and then we're going to have a regen rate. And that regen rate could be something as simple as 1, but we saw on the extinguisher that 1 goes very quickly, so let's try 0.1. So we add the regen rate to the current intensity time.delta time. So what this is saying is, one more time, let's say that if our current intensity is less than maximum intensity, which is 1, and the current time minus the time that we last watered is greater than the regen delay. That is, if we've waited that those 2.5 seconds, then we're going to increase the intensity of the fire by the regen rate. So the regen rate is 0.1 per second. Okay. And then because we're changing the current intensity, we want to do a change intensity call. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at how that will look in our scene. And let's press play there. Sorry, let's go back in here. Let's take a look. We've got some new fields here. We've got the regen delay and the regen rate. I'm going to go ahead and look at debug law at the debugging. So I clicked on these three dots and I went into debug so I could see the time last watered. Okay, so that's time since we press played. So let's hit that. Okay, so time since last watered, the time that it was last watered was at 3 seconds. So I guess we're watering it right now. Okay, that's my bad. All right, so we stopped watering it. 2.5 seconds went by. The intensity is going back up, so that's working. All right, I'm going to water it again. The time that we last watered it was 20 seconds after we pressed play. Now it's been 23 seconds or whatever, so the intensity's going back up and it's regenerating itself. So now we can see that we can regenerate the fire. That's pretty cool. So the last thing we're going to want to do here is make sure that that fire goes out for good, because if let's say I get it all the way down to 0 and then I leave it, let's say that the fire should be out and then I leave it, it's going to regenerate after 2.5 seconds. So what I want to do is actually keep the fire in two states. I want to have it in the state of being lit or the state of being out, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and shift the position of these floats here to be with their other float friends. So I'm gonna start this fire off as being lit, and I'm just gonna make that a bool, and I'm just gonna say it's isLit equals true. So all our fires are always gonna start as being lit, and if the fire is lit and the current intensity is less than 1, okay, then I'm going to go ahead and increase the intensity. So what you might say is that if your intensity is 0, then that isLit should be false. That is absolutely true. So what we're going to say is once we extinguish the fire, then we're going to say what we want to do is go ahead and say if the fire is no longer lit, that is if the current intensity is less than or equal to 0, then we're going to change isLit to false. We're going to change the intensity. Actually, we can do that with both. So after the intensity change, let's go ahead and make sure that we call change intensity. So the fire will no longer be lit, and we're just going to return true that the fire was extinguished. And if it still has intensity, then we're going to return false to say that the fire is still lit. Now let's make sure that that works. Let's go back into the inspector. I'm going to close the particle system. I'm going to go back into debug mode, and I'm looking for isLit. The fire is lit by default. I'm going to aim my water cannon at it, and the intensity is going down here. As the intensity drops below 0 or to 0 or below, I should see isLit becomes false. And now after that regen delay, after those 2.5 seconds, we can see that the fire no longer comes back to life. Perfect. Remember that you can use this type of system not only for just this fire, but also for example, if you're doing like a Call of Duty FPS and you shoot someone and they're at less than maximum health, and then they step behind a wall and a certain amount of time has passed, right? If they pass that regen delay, then they regenerate their health. Okay, so this is a concept that you can take and use in other systems. For now, we're going to cut this video short because it's gone quite long and I didn't expect it to go this long. So in the next one, we'll go over the steam effects and stuff like that so that we can visualize, so that you can indicate to your player that they're actually hitting the fire. If you want to see that and you're not subscribed, then make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so that you get notified as to when that video comes out. Thanks a lot for watching this one. Hopefully you learned something. We'll see you in the next one.